Hey everyone, I'm Matt Ford and welcome to the Good Trouble Show. As most of you know, we primarily cover the UAP issue, but as we're all discovering, we live in a complex universe, and some of it gets a little woo-woo-ish. And tonight we are going to step right into that. Today's guest is Elizabeth Ray, founder of Insightful. She works with established founders and investors who believe that data, advisors, and even artificial intelligence don't always tell the full story. She describes her work as psychic intelligence, an ability she first applied while assisting U.S. federal agents on cold murder cases, and now brings it into business and strategic decision-making. Please welcome to the show, Elizabeth Ray. Elizabeth, welcome to the show. How are you? Have you finished all of your holiday shopping and all that good stuff?
I'm done. I keep it super simple. Yes.
Smart. Okay, so we met at a function at the Soul Foundation. It was kind of a small private function. And what we're about to talk about today, is kind of something that I've never really gone into on this show. But as I like to say, we live in a very complex universe, and there are all sorts of things that we don't quite understand. So how do you usually explain to someone exactly what you do, when you meet someone for the first time?
Yeah, it's tricky. So I'm an evidentiary, clairvoyant, psychic medium, but not many people actually know what that means. So I'll often introduce myself as a psychic detective or a psychic spy, depending upon your perspective. That's usually something someone can digest and really immediately understand what I'm up to.
Okay. And when was this something that happened at a certain age, or was there an event that triggered this ability, or is this something you really kind of had as long as you can remember?
No, I had a near-death experience when I was a teenager, and that doesn't always, but can often prompt this ability. And then it sort of came in waves over time. And then I went to a organization called the Hoffman Institute, and it's a self-development institute. It's been around since the early 60s. The Hoffman process itself was channeled by a psychic medium, even though they don't brag about that. And after the process, my teacher took me aside and she said, well, this is not official Hoffman advice, but I want to let you know, as you've had all these various precognitive, postcognitive experiences throughout your life, when you leave here, the doors to your mind are going to blow wide open. And I thought, what's she talking about? Well, that sounds very ominous. That's exactly what happened 2 weeks later. That's what happened. Wow.
Okay. And you don't refer to yourself as being psychic. You call it a psychic intelligence. What is the difference there?
Yeah, I think it's the same, really. What I'm doing is just conveying that, I'm not an entertainer, right? You can provide psychic information or insight, and I'm trying to convey that this is an actual level of intelligence that all of your critical thinking, all your lived experience, all of your expert advisors or your data can't even detect. So that's why I use that phrase. It's really just another, for the people I work with, it's another layer of due diligence, if that makes sense.
Sure. And is it, so really what you're saying is being psychic and sort of psychic intelligence is really sort of one and the same. It's just kind of talking about it in a different way. Now,
right.
When when the first time that you had this happen, when you realized that you had this ability, let me back it up. When you realized you had this ability, how did that process in your mind? Was it like, wow, this is weird? Was it obvious that all of a sudden this switch had been turned on? Or did it take you a while to sort of comprehend what you now had the ability to do?
Well, I hid it for 14 years. I actually just kept it quiet. I did work with U.S. federal agents on cold murder case investigations, and then would do sessions every now and then on the down low. I think the first I had precognition and postcognition pretty early on in my life, and I think the very, very first experience I had of mediumship or being able to make contact with consciousness was I was invited to potentially collaborate on a project with a friend of mine who's an architect. And he invited me to meet him and the developer in this building in downtown Napa Valley. And it was called the Fajani Building, and it had been shut up like a time capsule for many years, like at least 2 decades. And the reason being was because 2 sisters owned this tavern. However, one of the sisters was brutally murdered, and
Oh, wow.
they couldn't, they were never able to solve the case. But she thought, well, if I preserve everything, all the evidence, keep it intact, maybe one day this murder will be solved. So I was given the history of the building, and then I went to sleep that night and I saw the murderer in a vivid dream. And I could see he had kind of wavy, dark, dirty blonde hair, a white t-shirt. And I just felt that he was just really angry and not that bright. And then I saw an image in my mind's eye, of an old-fashioned tail fin of a car.
Okay.
And it was off-white, it was a bit weathered, and I saw these little green, really shiny leaves around this tail fin. And I literally sat up out of my sleep. And I knew that I had just met the murderer.
Wow.
It was just an instant knowing. Mm-hmm. But what do you do with that information, right? So I just went and met with the architect and the developer, and we're given a tour of this 3-story building. And I came to a spot, and I felt this rush that sort of hit my chest, an energy that hit my chest. And the developer was facing this way, and he had kind of his head in the ice chest in the kitchen area. And I said, is this the spot where the body was found? Because I just felt this immediate presence and energy. And he said, yeah, actually, you're standing on the exact spot. And
Wow.
yeah. So my friend, the architect, turned white and the blood drained out of his face. But however, I didn't have that reaction. Because it's done, right? It's been done over 20
Sure.
years. I just knew I knew. And that was pretty wild. Here's what's really interesting. Within 30 days, through DNA testing that finally occurred, they found the murderer who was
Wow.
serving time for a violent rape in a Colorado prison. And he stole her white Cadillac, and it was never recovered. So that was the tail fin that I was seeing in this
I see.
vivid vision. So that was the first. That was my introduction.
Okay, that's a pretty big introduction. And then what sort of happened subsequently? You mentioned that you started working with law enforcement. How did that happen?
Yeah, so I was on the receiving end of a menacing stalker who is a homeless man who is drug addicted and quite mentally ill and very menacing. When he was messing around with me, he had 16 restraining orders and several felonies. And the justice system just, recycles people like him, and they don't ever really get put away for any length of time. They're beyond treatment. But I did get a precognition that I said to my friend, there's going to be a strange man lurking at my door at night. About
wow.
4 years prior to his appearance. And I said, I think I'm going to get a taser gun. Just going to get that.
Sure.
So I did. And then lo and behold, this is what happens. And then he tried to break into my place. And, I thought I can be scared right now, or I can find courage. And so I thought, I'm not going to be scared. I'm going to find my courage. And so I had to work with special agents on this case because it was just the San Francisco DA wasn't prosecuting. Like he was recalled actually. So it was a mess, and I got to know them. And so I said to one of the sergeants, "Hey, did you want to be a ballerina when you were little?" And she said, "In fact, I still want to be a ballerina. And I even use the bar method to work out." So we became friends, and that's how I started with cold case murder investigations. And honestly, I loved it. I really did. I felt like Wonder Woman without the big boobs and without the cape. I really felt, obviously these are tragedies that occurred, but I was able somehow to compartmentalize and look past that and focus on justice that needed to be served. And I still have a taste for justice and fairness, and I enjoy helping keep people out of harm's way. I love spotting hidden agendas or opportunities that people may be missing. But that's how I started really utilizing this. And then I think through the process too, I gained a lot of confidence because I was very specific in what I was getting, and it was very helpful. So that's how it unfolded essentially.
Okay. So when law enforcement or your relationships in there, how does the process work? Do they come to you and say, "Elizabeth, hey, we've got this one particular case we can't figure out"? Walk us through that whole process. And is that process the same from case to case?
Well, all the cases are different and the number of leads are different, and law enforcement is quite overwhelmed and understaffed. So this is really a way to give them an advantage. By the way, I don't work with law enforcement anymore. It's just where I started. I'm still friends with, I'm still good friends with one of the agents, but the way it started was they actually put a double sealed evidence box at my feet. And then they said, "What can you tell us about the contents of the box?" And I said, "Well, you've got a black baseball cap in there, but you were going to put something else in the box, and then you changed your mind at the last minute." So they opened up the box, and they opened up the envelope, and there was the black baseball cap. And they said, "We were going to put another piece of evidence in this box, but it's more sensitive and crucial to the case. So we did change our minds at the last minute. So will you now come to the scene of the murder?" And I said, "Yes, let's go." And so they weren't giving me background or anything. I had the essence of what happened, but not many details. So we were walking around. Go ahead.
No, please.
Oh, so we were walking around this area and where the scene of the murder was, and I just felt pulled down, and I literally laid down, face down on the sidewalk. And I said, "Is this the spot where the body was found?" And they said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, do you want to know what his last thoughts were before he passed over?" And they said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, he thought of his younger sister who has long brown hair down to her waist. Does he have a sister and who fits that description?" And they said, "Yes. In fact, they were quite close." So that's what it looks like. It looks odd. And I want to also just interject something. I was a skeptic once.
Okay.
Now the joke's on me. I was actually always interested in all things paranormal. I would even listen to Art Bell on Coast to Coast Radio. Yeah, but then when the psychic mediums came on, I would shut it off. I would like, please, that can't be possible. And I would shut the radio off. So.
And when you were speaking earlier about precognition, which I've heard about, and I understand what that is. What exactly is postcognition? You brought that term up, but to be honest, I've never heard it.
Yeah. So precognition is, knowing what is likely to happen in the future. Doesn't mean it will, because we all have free will, right? But here's what's trending, what's likely to happen. Postcognition, I actually gave an example of that. Like I saw the white Cadillac that was stolen from the murder victim. That was that's looking back in time, looking, and so it's looking back versus looking forward. And then mediumship. So the difference between a psychic and a medium is quite significant. So a psychic has precognition or postcognition, but and a medium is a psychic, but a psychic is not a medium. A medium has precognition, postcognition, and also the ability to make contact with consciousness, either living or dead. So that's how I was helpful in helping investigate murders, because I get clues from the dead, the deceased, and also can get into the consciousness of the perpetrator. And so that's how it really functions. It's in this very woo category for many people, and I understand that, but it is an incredibly practical tool for many reasons, in many different ways. And the way that I use it now is working with established founders and investors and all the people around them who have hidden agendas and who are up to no good, or, who should we hire?
Tell us a bit about that, because I remember you explaining that to me at the Soul Conference, which I found really, really fascinating. But if I recall correctly, you're actually doing this work for the C-suite of very big companies, Fortune 500 companies, and helping them with certain things. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, not so much C-suite, but founders, right? So this because C-suite executives are more constrained and usually executing on a strategy that's given by the founder. So it's usually founders or investors. And it could be, an example of a hiring decision. So for example, I have a client who owns 4 institutional investing firms. He's the CEO, he's the founder. And so he asked me about a hiring decision. And he said, I'm thinking about hiring this guy for this new business initiative. What can you tell me? And I said, well, he's quite round in the middle and he has very nice shoes.
Sounds like me.
I think he's much rounder than you. He's really
right.
round. You're not round.
Okay. Well, I do wear nice shoes at least. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So what it is so I get glimpses of identifying characteristics of the person I'm looking into. Often their hair, because that's one of the most identifying characteristics that we all possess. And so he said, well, what can you tell me? And I said, well, besides being round in the middle and having nice shoes, he lacks integrity in your eyes, and you're going to go ahead and hire him anyway. I don't even know why you're asking me. So he said, well, actually, I do feel like he lacks integrity. And he's fathered 3 children, and I'm a devoted husband and father. And that just kind of makes me wonder that from three different women, and it's not clear that he actually supports them. And so, well, you don't have to be psychic to know that is probably not a good fit for a situation where there are a lot of trust is involved. And he did hire him because he really was feeling this urgency to fill the spot. And I asked him a couple weeks ago, how's, oh, by the way, he is round and he wears Ferragamo shoes. And so,
oh, okay. All right. I don't wear that Ferragamo shoes, but anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. So I said, how's nice shoes going? How's that going? And he said, yeah, you're right. He's doing okay, but he hasn't really met any great expectations. So I guess the reason I give that example is I'm not in charge, right? Everyone has to make their own decisions. I just help inform decisions. That's my goal. So that's one of many examples of how it's very practical.
And when people hire you to do this sort of thing, how do they find out about you? And how do they know that? Is it just through experience or having worked with you? How do they know that your intuition is correct about an individual? And are you ever wrong? Do you ever get a feeling about someone and then it turns out that maybe what you were feeling does not match up with what you sort of thought would happen?
Yeah. So people work with me by referral, and what I do, it's I don't advertise. I don't have a social media presence. So people work with me by referral, and we just have we have a quick meeting, and if it looks like there's something they're genuinely interested in, then what I do is I offer a one question reading so that they can, it's like going to the winery and getting a sip of the wine before you buy the bottle or join the wine club, right? So that's how it works. And yeah, I'm not all knowing and I'm not all seeing. I'd probably be levitating instead of sitting in this chair if I was.
Sure.
No, that's impossible. It pretty much follows the 80-20 rule. So about 80% of what I share is immediately validated or validating, or it is helpful and actionable. 20% kind of makes sense, but part of that 20% of information conveyed can make perfect sense later. It can have meaning later. So all my sessions are always recorded for that reason. I remember one session I had with a professor. She was like, no. And I said, okay, well, I'm pretty confident I'm giving you pretty valid insight here. And I said, so hold on to the recording. And a year later, she sends me this long text about how this happened. But in the moment, it wasn't apparent. It wasn't easy for her to connect to. It wasn't clear. So it doesn't always play nice with time. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't.
And when you're talking to people, what is sort of the most common sort of skepticism you run into, or like what would that skepticism typically be, and how would you respond to that skepticism?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I respect skepticism because I was a skeptic, so I do understand. And our paradigms, our cultural paradigms here in the West, our religious paradigms or atheistic paradigms or our scientific materialism really prevents us from thinking this is even possible. So I understand it. And I say it's fine. I just ask the people, people should be skeptical. I just ask that they're not cynical, because that's just outright disrespectful and we're wasting each other's time. But I don't usually attract that. People have already heard of me, or they know someone who worked with me. And so they come in with a certain degree of confidence and trust. And then I give them a taste of it. And if it works for them, then great. And if not, it's fine. But typically, I find that, I was in the closet for 14 years because I had in my mind that, I'm going to have to deal with all this resistance and explanation and skepticism and judgment and maybe even scorn. And I've been pleasantly surprised. People are incredibly curious about this. They themselves have had precognitive or postcognitive experiences that they can't explain, or they've had a vivid dream that's come true, or they know someone. So people are much more open than I think I feared they would be. And I haven't met someone who hasn't had an experience, either directly or indirectly. So it's hard to dismiss.
Sure. And do you think that this ability is something that everyone has? It's just maybe it woke up in you and the rest of us that hasn't sort of bubbled up to the surface?
I think it absolutely exists within all of us, 100%. I do think that. I think our paradigms prevent us from believing we have the ability and listening to our intuition. I try to give the analogy, like not everyone is a 7-foot star basketball player, but you can still learn to dribble the ball and get it in the net. Absolutely. It takes just a willingness to trust your perception. That's, I think, number one. And then learning to look for the key distinctions between guessing and actually receiving intuition, or magical thinking versus intuition. And I've actually trained some of my clients how to tap into their own intuition, because I'm not around all the time and I want them to strengthen that muscle.
And I'm curious too, Elizabeth, has there been a personal cost, for you as a human being in having this ability? Is it something, have there been costs associated with it for you personally? And If so, are you glad you have these abilities, or is it something you kind of wish, sort of be careful what you wish for sort of thing?
This is a great question. So when this first came crashing in, it was very discombobulating. I was very dysregulated. And then I had the good fortune to meet the Dalai Lama's emissary.
Wow.
I don't like, how the hell did that happen, right?
Yeah.
But someone introduced us because he is a psychic medium. He actually, before you gain audience with the Dalai Lama, he'll decide, if you're a worthy audience. And then his mother was an oracle. Now the Dalai Lama, doesn't make a move without consulting the oracle. There's like so many names for the same type of person, really. And so I sat with him in Kona, and he spoke to me in his broken English, and he just explained what it was like, how the Tibetan Buddhists regarded this gift. And he also explained that it was revered and it was valued, and it was a path to enlightenment. It's not enlightenment in and of itself, make no mistake, but it's a path. And he said, and then in your culture, it's a scary movie. So no wonder you're all discombobulated and dysregulated. Sure. And it did take me a minute to find the dimmer switch on this. So that helped, but I wouldn't trade this for the world. I freaking love this ability. It's so powerful. It's life affirming. It's inspiring. It's so helpful. And it's a beautiful, beautiful gift. I absolutely love it. Now, all of that said, at that same meeting where you and I met someone who has this ability through contact with, and she's wasn't so happy. She said, I don't know who to talk to about this. I can't discuss this with my family. I'm very overwhelmed by it. So I invited her to come have tea and talk about it and help her find the dimmer switch and see it as a gift. Because it's, what did Wayne Dyer say? That's something to the effect of when you change the way that you look at things, the things that you look at change. So if you're seeing this as a curse, it will be a curse. If you're seeing this as a gift, it will be a gift. And I see it as a gift. I feel blessed. I feel absolutely blessed that I have this ability. And you have the ability to make contact with people that have passed on. Do I understand that correctly? Okay. That's right.
And are you able to have that with anyone? Like, for instance, I don't know if you still have your parents here, or are you able at will to talk to deceased relatives, or like how does that work for you on a personal level?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I always say to people, I'm like a radio, but I'm not in charge of broadcasting. So whoever wants to step forward and come through will, but I don't have control over that. I'm just the vessel. And also, when something involves my own emotions, because none of this involves logic, it's all emotion, right? And so both of my parents are deceased. I've never made contact with them. And I had a friend who managed to get some psychic intelligence around my mother once. But so I will rely on my friends who are psychics we trade, right? Because you can't, it's like anybody. You can't see your own stuff very well, right? If you're emotionally involved or invested, you're not so clear thinking. So anyway, I think I do use the guidance for myself, but there are some matters that I need help with for sure. Yeah, like everybody.
And do you ever have this sort of contact and decide not to tell the person maybe some bad information that you were given by the other side?
Sometimes you do have to walk a fine line about how you deliver information, for sure. I was just having this discussion, actually. So there's something called the death mask. The death mask is a gray haze that you can see over someone's face in your mind's eye. And what it means is they're about to pass over. They're about to die.
Okay.
And I had a friend I saw the death mask and I'm like, oh God, how do I deliver this? Because he was a very devout, born again Christian. And I was like, I'm going to have to, well, how am I going to deliver this? But I could tell it was urgent. So his name was Simon. And I said, Simon, how are you feeling? And he said, oh, I'm not feeling good. I'm like, you look like hell, Simon. You need to go to the emergency room right now. And I just kept on him. And he actually listened to me. And had he not listened to me and gone to the emergency room at the time he did, he would have not have received the double lung transplant that kept him alive for 2.5 years. He would have gone on to the waiting list, and he probably would have died on the waiting list. So that's an instance where, you have to be really thoughtful about how you deliver.
And I'm curious, in that particular instance, so he goes to the ER, finds out that he has to have a double lung transplant. It extends his life for a couple of years. Did this kind of death mask disappear for a period of time, or was it always there?
No, it was just in an instant that I saw it. And it was just saw it, and I got the message, and then I delivered the message. And then it just disappeared from my mind's eye. Yeah.
Wow.
It didn't
well,
stay.
Elizabeth, this has really been fantastic. And I understand you're very private about this, but can people reach out to you and have a reading or whatever they choose to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So if they go to my website, they can use the contact form to reach out. If they want to learn more about it, we can connect. I just don't work with people right off the bat. I want to make sure that I can help, first of all, and that they understand what I do and what I don't do. So I'm just particular about how and who I work with, because I want to make sure I'm being helpful. And I can't help everybody. I want to help the people who I feel wired to help and who want to receive the help.
Well, that's fantastic. So we've included in the YouTube description your website so people can reach out to you if they choose to. But Elizabeth, I'm really glad you came on the show. Really appreciate it. And like I said, I was so fascinated by what you had to say at this little private soul foundation meeting. And I'm like, I got to get this lady on the show to talk about this stuff. I don't personally understand any of it, but I love the analogy that you said. I think I read it on your website that you have a car, you don't know how the car works, you just know it works.
Yes. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you know this, but Peter Scoffish of the Soul Foundation wrote a book on mediumship.
Really? Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yes.
Oh, well, now I have something new to read. Well, I love that. Well, Elizabeth, have a great holiday, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Gosh. Yeah, thanks.